Poor mom dresses up as Santa Claus so her daughter will believe. The billionaire sees the scene and changes their lives. Rachel Miles looked at the clock on the kitchen wall. 9:30 at night. Sophie had just fallen asleep on the living room couch. The little girl always did this on Christmas Eve. She would wait for Santa Claus until exhaustion won. Rachel looked at her daughter curled up under the thin blanket, her blonde hair spread across the arm of the sofa, her face serene. Perfect. It would be easier to make the magic happen with Sophie already in the living room. Rachel turned her eyes back to the kitchen table, where everything she had managed to gather was laid out. An old red coat she found in the back of the closet, a black belt that once belonged to Sophie's father, before he left, a bag of cotton balls left over from a first aid kit, and a white wool hat she had knitted herself years ago. It wasn't much, but it had to be enough, because Sophie believed, and Rachel wasn't going to let that belief die. Not on Christmas. Not when it was the only thing that made her daughter's blue eyes shine that way. She picked up the scissors and started cutting strips of cotton. Her hands worked quickly, with practice. It wasn't the first time she had improvised something out of nothing. Rachel glued cotton to the hem of the coat. She attached some to the hat, adjusted the belt. She stood up and put everything on, looking at her reflection in the window pane. It was unlikely to fool anyone in broad daylight, but in the dark living room, with Sophie still half asleep, it might just work. Rachel took off the costume and put it in a bag. She checked the clock again, 10 o'clock. She needed to go out because there was one more thing. Something no one knew about. Every Christmas Eve, Rachel would go out at night dressed as Santa Claus and leave little notes on her neighbors' doors. Nothing fancy, just phrases like, "You are special," or "The world is a better place with you in it." It was all she could give, but it was something, and tonight, even tired, even with no money, she was going to do it again. Rachel grabbed the bag full of handwritten notes and looked at Sophie one more time. The girl was sleeping soundly. Great. Rachel had time. She put on the costume, adjusted the hat, grabbed the bag, and went out through the back door of the apartment building. The streets were still busy. Some people heading home, cars passing by, Christmas lights twinkling in the windows. The cold air bit her face, but Rachel kept going, keeping her head down. She didn't notice the car that slowed down as it passed her, nor the man who saw her. Julian Parker didn't usually drive around aimlessly at night, but on this Christmas Eve, he couldn't stay home. The loneliness was too heavy, so he got in his car and just drove, with no destination in mind. He just wanted movement, anything to break the silence of his empty house. He was driving through a residential neighborhood when he saw something strange, a red figure walking down the sidewalk. Julian frowned and slowed down. Was that Santa Claus? No, it couldn't be. Santa Claus didn't exist, and even if he did, he wouldn't be walking alone on the streets at 10 at night. But the figure wore a red coat, a white hat, and carried a bag. Julian stopped the car on the other side of the street, curious. The person, he couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman yet, stopped in front of a door and placed something on the doorknob, then moved on to the next house, and the next. Julian watched, intrigued. What on earth was happening? Then the figure turned under a streetlight, and Julian got a better look. It was a woman, slender, blonde, with strands of hair escaping from the hat. The costume was clearly improvised, the coat too old, the cotton beard crooked, but she kept going, house by house, door by door. Julian didn't know why, but something about it captivated him. He put the car in motion again, following slowly, keeping his distance. The woman didn't notice. She was too focused on what she was doing. 3 more houses, 3 more notes left on the doors. And then she stopped. She looked at the empty bag, took a deep breath, and turned towards an old building at the end of the street. Julian parked and watched her walk to the back door. He should leave. This was none of his business. But instead, he got out of the car. He walked towards the building, slowly, quietly. The woman went in through the back door. Julian crept closer to the lit ground floor window, just enough to see what was happening. Rachel entered her home through the kitchen, still dressed as Santa Claus. She had left the living room light on purpose. Sophie needed to see when Santa came in. She peeked out from the kitchen. Sophie was still sleeping on the couch, curled up in the blanket, peaceful, perfect. Rachel went to the drawer near the TV and opened it slowly, without making a sound. She searched inside. Maybe there was something, anything. An old toy Sophie wouldn't remember. But the drawer was empty. Rachel closed the drawer and took a deep breath. It was okay. It wouldn't be the first time she had to improvise. Sophie was little. She just wanted to believe that Santa had come. Seeing him would be enough. It had to be. Rachel adjusted the costume, the cotton beard, the hat. Time to make the magic happen. She stepped out of the kitchen and into the living room, making noise on purpose. Heavy footsteps, a low ho, ho, ho. Sophie stirred on the couch. Rachel stood still near the imaginary tree, waiting. The little girl opened her eyes slowly, blinking, confused. And then she saw the red figure standing in the room. Her blue eyes widened. "Santa Claus," she whispered, still half asleep. "You came." Rachel felt her chest warm. It had worked. "Have you been a good girl?" she asked in the deepest voice she could manage. Sophie sat up on the couch in a flash, nodding her head with so much excitement that her blonde curls bounced. "Yes, I have." Rachel approached and knelt in front of her. Sophie looked at her with those bright eyes, full of expectation and sleepiness. "Did you bring me anything?" Rachel hesitated for just a second. "This year, Santa came because you are a special child." Sophie smiled, not seeming disappointed. "Just having you here is the best present." Rachel felt her heart ache in a good way. "You're amazing, you know that," she said, forgetting for a moment to disguise her voice. Sophie blinked but was too drowsy to notice. "Now go back to sleep, little one. Santa has to go." "Okay," Sophie murmured, already settling back on the couch. "Merry Christmas, Santa." "Merry Christmas, my love," Rachel whispered. Sophie closed her eyes, still smiling, hugging her blanket. Rachel waited until she was sure her daughter had fallen back asleep. Then she went to the kitchen, took off the costume and put it all away in the closet. She got a glass of water and sat at the table. She looked through the kitchen doorway, seeing Sophie sleeping peacefully on the couch. And she smiled a little. It had worked. Sophie had seen Santa Claus, and she had thought that was enough. Maybe it was. Julian was paralyzed outside. He had seen everything through the living room window. The woman dressed as Santa Claus coming in. The makeshift costume? The cotton falling off? But she kept going anyway. The little girl sleeping on the couch, blonde, small, wrapped in a thin blanket. The girl waking up and seeing her mother dressed as Santa, her eyes shining with joy. The question, "Did you bring me anything?" And the mother improvising, saying that just her visit was the present. The girl accepting it, smiling, going back to sleep happy. Julian watched as the woman left the living room and went to the kitchen, watched as she took off the costume, tired but relieved, watched as she sat at the table and drank water, looking at her daughter sleeping on the couch. There was no sadness on her face, just exhaustion. And satisfaction at having made Sophie believe. But Julian knew the truth. He had seen the woman open that empty drawer, looking for something that wasn't there. That child deserved more than just belief. She deserved to wake up and find something real. And he could make that happen. Julian ran back to his car, started the engine, and drove away. He drove through the streets looking for stores that were still open. Most were already closed. It was Christmas Eve, almost midnight, but he didn't give up. Finally, he found a small toy store with the lights still on. He parked quickly, rushed inside. The owner was closing the register. "Sorry, we're closing." "Please," Julian interrupted. "I just need one thing." "It's for a child. It's urgent." The man looked at him, hesitant, but something in Julian's voice made him stop. "Okay, make it quick." Julian walked through the aisles. It had to be something special, something that little girl would love. And then he saw it. A rag doll with a little blue dress and yellow yarn hair. Simple, pretty, perfect. He grabbed it and took it to the counter. "How much?" $20. Julian handed him a 50. "Keep the change, and thank you." He ran out, got in his car, and drove back to the building. The living room light was still on. He parked, grabbed the doll, and went to the front door. He took a deep breath and knocked. Rachel was still in the kitchen when she heard the knock. She frowned. Who could that be at this hour? She went to the door, passing through the living room where Sophie slept. "Who is it?" "My name is Julian," a voice came from the other side. "I know this is going to sound strange, but I need to talk to you." Rachel opened the door just a crack, suspicious. She saw a tall man in a dark suit with well-groomed hair. He was holding a doll. "Who are you?" she asked quietly, so as not to wake Sophie. Julian held up the doll. "I was driving by, and I saw through the window. I saw you, dressed as Santa Claus. I saw the performance with your daughter." Rachel felt her face flush. "Were you spying on me?" "It wasn't my intention," Julian said quickly, also speaking quietly. "I saw you on the street earlier, dressed as Santa, handing out notes. I got curious. And then I saw you come into the house. I saw everything through the living room window, and I realized that you didn't have a present to leave for her." Rachel crossed her arms. "And why does that bother you?" Julian hesitated. "Because I thought it was beautiful. What you did, the magic you created, and I thought your daughter deserved to have something real when she wakes up." He held out the doll. "I think Santa must have dropped this on his way out." Rachel looked at the doll, then at him. "Why would you do this?" "You don't know me," Julian shrugged. "Because it's Christmas, and because I saw how much you care. I saw you leaving your home to spread happiness to others. I saw you doing the best you could for your daughter." Rachel was quiet for a moment, sizing him up. He didn't seem dangerous. He seemed sincere. She opened the door a little wider and took the doll. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer now. Julian smiled. "You're welcome, and I'm sorry for invading your privacy, but I couldn't leave without doing something." Rachel looked at the doll, then back at him. "You just saved my daughter's Christmas." Julian nodded. "Then it was worth it." They stood there for a few seconds in silence. Then Julian took a step back. "Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas," Rachel repeated softly, and then he turned and walked away. Rachel stood in the doorway, holding the doll, watching him get into his car and drive off. When the taillights disappeared around the corner, she closed the door carefully. She looked at the doll, perfect. Then she looked at Sophie, still sleeping on the couch. Rachel went over, knelt down, and placed the doll in her daughter's lap, between her arms and the blanket. Sophie stirred a little but didn't wake up. Rachel smiled and kissed the girl's forehead. "Merry Christmas, my love." When Sophie woke up in the morning, the first thing she felt was something soft in her arms. She opened her eyes slowly and looked down. A doll. Her eyes widened. She picked up the doll carefully and jumped off the couch. "Mommy, Mommy, Santa Claus came back!" Rachel appeared from the kitchen, smiling. "He came back? He came last night. I saw him, and when I woke up just now, she was here." Sophie hugged the doll tightly, her blue eyes shining. "Pa, he came back and left her for me." Rachel knelt and pulled her daughter into a hug. "And what are you going to name her?" Sophie looked at the doll, thinking, "Bella. I'm going to call her Bella." Rachel kissed the top of her daughter's blonde head. "Bella is a beautiful name." Sophie smiled so wide that Rachel was sure this was the best Christmas ever. Because even though they started with nothing, in the end, she had managed to give Sophie everything, with a little help, from a stranger named Julian, who had seen her doing her best and decided to complete the magic. Rachel didn't know if she would ever see him again, but she hoped she would, because it had been a long time since someone had looked at her with kindness, and that had meant more than he could ever imagine. Across town, Julian was sitting on his porch. The house was still large, empty, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone, because that night, he had been part of something bigger. He had helped create magic for a child who deserved it, and for a mother who made the impossible happen. Julian took a sip of coffee and smiled. He didn't know if he would see that woman and her little girl again, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to forget them, ever. because they had shown him something he hadn't seen in years, that sometimes the most valuable magic isn't the kind you buy, it's the kind you create with love. Julian hadn't been able to stop thinking about them. It had been 4 days since Christmas, 4 days since he'd seen that woman dressed as Santa Claus, since he'd delivered the doll to her door. He came home every day hoping the memory would fade, but it wouldn't. It stayed with him. The image of the little blonde girl sleeping on the couch. The mother creating magic out of nothing. The smile when Sophie had asked if Santa had brought anything. Julian had closed million-dollar deals. He had bought companies. He had built an empire. And none of it had moved him the way that night had. He was in his office trying to focus on reports when he gave up. He grabbed his coat and left. He needed air. Movement. Anything other than those 4 walls. The downtown area was crowded. It always was after Christmas, people enjoying their days off, the sales, the still festive atmosphere in the streets. Julian walked aimlessly, his hands in his pockets, looking at the decorated store windows. That's when he saw her, a blonde woman standing in front of a Christmas decoration store. And next to her, a little girl holding her hand. Julian stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. It couldn't be, but it was. Rachel and Sophie. They were looking at a window display full of colorful ornaments, shiny baubles, and golden garlands. Sophie was pointing at something, talking excitedly. Rachel was smiling, nodding. Julian stood there, a few feet behind them, unsure of what to do. Walk away. Approach them. He had invaded their privacy that night. He had seen something he shouldn't have. Maybe it was better to leave it alone. But then he thought about how Rachel had thanked him at the door, the way she had looked at him, without judgment, just gratitude. And before he could overthink it, Julian started walking towards them, slowly, carefully, not wanting to startle them. He stopped a few steps away. "Hello," he said softly. Rachel turned her head, surprised. For a second, she just blinked. Then she recognized him. "Julian?" Sophie looked up, saw the man, and her blue eyes widened. "It's you." "The man who brought Bella," Julian smiled, crouching down a little to be closer to the girl's height. "Hi, Sophie. How is Bella?" "She's great. She sleeps with me every night," Sophie said quickly, excited. "And I make clothes for her with scraps of fabric Mommy gives me." "Really? You make clothes for her?" "I do." "Mommy taught me." Julian looked at Rachel, whose cheeks were slightly flushed. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said. "Me neither," Julian admitted. "I was just walking and I saw you." Rachel was quiet for a second, then took a step forward. "I didn't get a chance to thank you properly that night. Everything happened so fast." Julian shook his head. "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do," Rachel insisted, her voice soft but firm. "You made her Christmas real. Thank you." Julian felt something tighten in his chest. "It was just a doll." "No," Rachel said quietly. "It was more than that. It was the difference between her waking up believing or doubting. You have no idea how much that meant." Julian didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. Sophie tugged on her mother's coat sleeve. "Mommy, can he look at the window with us?" Rachel looked at Julian, a bit awkwardly. "You don't have to." "I'd love to," Julian interrupted. The 3 of them stood side by side, looking at the window display. Sophie pointed to each ornament, telling stories about each one. Rachel smiled, adding details here and there, and Julian just listened, feeling something he hadn't felt in years: belonging. After a few minutes, Sophie pointed to a golden star at the top of the display. "Look, Mommy, just like the one in the story." Rachel looked and smiled. "It is." "Just like it." Julian looked at them both. "What story?" Sophie turned to him, excited. "My mom tells me stories before I go to sleep, and there's one about a star that guides people home." "That sounds like a beautiful story." "It is. I know it by heart," Sophie said proudly. Rachel gently touched her daughter's head, then looked at her watch. "Now, Sophie, we still need to stop by the grocery store before it closes." The girl pouted but nodded. "Okay." Rachel looked at Julian. "It was good to see you." "It was good to see you too." They stood there for a few more seconds, a comfortable silence. Then Rachel hesitated as if deciding something. "Julian, yes, if you ever need to talk or something, we live in the old building on Oak Street, ground floor apartment." Julian felt his chest warm. "Thank you. I'll remember that." Rachel gave a slight smile. Sophie waved her little hand. "Tabashi, Julian." "Bye, Sophie." Then they turned and went on their way, mother and daughter hand in hand, disappearing into the crowd. Julian stood there for a few more minutes, looking in the direction they had gone. Something had changed. He didn't know exactly what, but it had. Maybe it was the way Sophie had spoken to him without fear, or Rachel's sincere thanks, or the casual invitation at the end, or maybe it was just the fact that, for the first time in years, someone had remembered him and had cared. Julian put his hands in his pockets and continued walking downtown. But now, he didn't feel as empty as before, because there were two people in the world who remembered him, and that was more than he'd had in a very long time. Rachel walked with Sophie, the two of them holding hands. "He's nice, isn't he, Mummy?" Rachel looked at her daughter. "Who?" "Julian. He's nice." Rachel smiled. "Yes, he seems to be. Do you think he'll visit us?" Rachel didn't know the answer. She wasn't sure if he would or if he should, but a part of her, a small, hidden part, hoped he would. "Maybe," she replied, "if he wants to." Sophie swung her mother's hand, satisfied with the answer, and Rachel kept walking, feeling something different in her chest. It wasn't infatuation. It wasn't desire. It was something simpler. It was the feeling that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to do everything alone all the time. That maybe there was someone who saw her not as someone needing help, but as someone worthy of being seen, and that, somehow, made all the difference. 3 blocks later, Rachel stopped in front of the small grocery store. Sophie still held her hand, swinging her arms. "Mommy?" "Yes, sweetie." "I'm glad he came to talk to us." Rachel looked at her daughter, saw her blue eyes shining. "I'm glad too." And it was true, because it had been a long time since someone had approached them because they wanted to. Not out of pity, not out of obligation, just because they wanted to. And that had a value Rachel couldn't explain. She squeezed her daughter's hand, and they entered the store together. But the entire time they were choosing the cheapest items, weighing what they could and couldn't afford, Rachel thought about him, about the way he had approached them so carefully. The genuine smile when Sophie talked about the doll, the look in his eyes when she had thanked him, and the strange odd but good, feeling that maybe this wasn't their last encounter, maybe there would be more. And for the first time in years, Rachel allowed herself to hope for something, without fear, just with a calm curiosity about what might come next, and that in itself was a gift. Julian showed up again 3 days later. He didn't plan it. At least that's what he told himself when he got in his car and drove to Oak Street. He parked in front of the old building and sat there for a few minutes, wondering if he should knock on the door. But then he saw Sophie playing in the small front garden. She was wearing a pink coat that was too big for her and holding the doll, Bella. Julian got out of the car. Sophie looked up and smiled. "Julian?" Rachel appeared at the door, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Julian, what a surprise." He stuck his hands in his pockets, a bit awkwardly. "I was just passing by and thought I'd say hi." Rachel smiled. "Want to come in? I just made coffee." Julian hesitated for only a second. "I'd love to." And so it began. In the following days, Julian came back. Again and again, he never called ahead, he just showed up. Sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon. Rachel never asked why. She just opened the door and invited him in. They started going out too. Little outings. Nothing elaborate. One afternoon, they went to a small cafe near the park. Sophie had hot chocolate, and Julian and Rachel shared a piece of pie. "What do you do for work?" Rachel asked, stirring her coffee. "Business," Julian answered vaguely. "Companies, investments, boring stuff." Rachel smiled. "It can't be that boring." Julian shrugged. "It is, but it's not. I don't know. It's not what I imagined I'd be doing when I was younger." "And what did you imagine?" Julian thought for a moment. Honestly, I don't know. I guess I never really stopped to think about it. Rachel nodded, understanding. Sometimes life just happens, and we just go along with it. Yeah, Julian agreed. So exactly that. Sophie licked the chocolate from the corner of her mouth. I know what I want to be when I grow up. Julian looked at her. What's that? A storyteller, like Mommy. Rachel laughed softly. I'm not a storyteller, sweetie. I just make up stories to help you sleep. But you're good at it, Sophie insisted. Mummy's stories are the best, Julian smiled. I'm sure they are. They stayed there for over an hour, just talking, about nothing and everything at the same time. And when they left, Julian felt something he hadn't felt in years. Lightness. A few days later, Julian brought something. He knocked on the door, and when Rachel opened it, she saw he was holding a small book. It's for Sophie, he said. I saw it in a bookstore and thought of her. Rachel took the book. It was an illustrated story about a girl and a star. Julian, you didn't have to. I know, but I wanted to. Sophie came running and her eyes widened when she saw the book. For me, Julian nodded. For you. Sophie took the book carefully, as if it was something precious, and hugged it to her chest. Thank you. Rachel looked at Julian, something stirring in her chest. Really, thank you. Julian just smiled. They started meeting at the park, too. Rachel would take Sophie to play, and Julian would show up. Sometimes with coffee for both of them, sometimes just to sit on a bench and talk. Do you have any family? Rachel asked one day, watching Sophie chase pigeons. Julian was quiet for a moment. Not anymore. My parents passed away a long time ago, and I'm an only child. I'm sorry. It's okay. It's been so long I hardly remember what it was like to have a family. Rachel looked at him. It must be lonely. Julian shrugged. Sometimes. But I got used to it. Rachel didn't say anything. She just kept watching Sophie. After a few minutes, she spoke softly. I know what that's like. The loneliness. Even when you have someone, sometimes it's even worse. Julian looked at her. Sophie's father left when she was 2. Rachel interrupted, her voice calm. Said he hadn't asked for this. For her. For me. So he left. I'm sorry. Rachel shook her head. Don't be. It was for the best. He wouldn't have stayed anyway. At least he was honest. Julian was quiet. Then he said softly, his loss. Rachel looked at him, surprised. What? It's his loss. Not staying. Not seeing her grow up. Not really getting to know you. Rachel felt her eyes sting, but she didn't let the tears fall. Thank you, she whispered. They sat there, side by side, watching Sophie play, and they didn't need to say anything more. Julian started bringing other things too. Books for Sophie, always books, and flowers for Rachel. Nothing expensive, nothing extravagant, just simple flowers he bought from the corner stand. You don't have to bring flowers every time you come, Rachel said one day, but she was smiling. I know, but I want to. Rachel put the flowers in a glass of water, she didn't own a vase, and left them on the kitchen table. And every time she looked at them, she felt something good. One Saturday afternoon, Julian showed up unannounced. As usual, Rachel was in the kitchen making cookies with Sophie. Julian! Sophie yelled when she saw him at the door. We're making cookies. Do you want to help? Julian looked at Rachel, who had flour on her face and in her hair. But you can come in, she said, laughing, but be warned, it's a mess in here. Julian came in and saw the kitchen, flour everywhere, dirty bowls in the sink, Sophie with her hands full of dough, and he thought it was beautiful. What can I do? He asked. You can cut the cookies, Sophie said, pushing a star-shaped cookie cutter towards him. Julian took off his coat, rolled up his sleeves, and started to help. They worked together, Sophie chattering non-stop, Rachel giving instructions, Julian trying not to mess up. At some point, Rachel looked at him and thought, I don't know what this is, but it's light, because it was having Julian there in her small kitchen, helping to make cookies, was light. There were no demands, no expectations, no weight, just the good feeling of not being alone. When the cookies were ready, the three of them sat at the table to eat. Sophie grabbed a still warm cookie and took a bite. "They're good." Rachel took one too and agreed. "Yes, they are." Julian ate one and smiled. "Best cookie I've ever had." Sophie laughed. "You're lying." "I'm not. I'm serious." Rachel looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, and she believed him. They started talking about small things, too. The weather, the bills, the traffic, the price of things at the store. Simple, everyday conversations. But there was something comforting about it. "Do you like living here?" Julian asked one day as they walked through the park. Rachel thought about it. "I do. It's small, old, but it's ours. And there are good people around." "Do you ever think about moving?" Rachel laughed. "With what money?" Julian didn't press, he just nodded. "But if you could?" Rachel looked up at the sky. "Maybe. To a place with a yard for Sophie to play in. Nothing big, just a place where she can run." Julian filed that away in his memory. One day, Julian brought another book for Sophie. She took it, excited, and ran to her room to read. Rachel and Julian stayed in the living room, drinking coffee. "You spoil her," Rachel said, but she was smiling. "She deserves it." "Still, you don't have to—" "Rachel," Julian interrupted gently. "I like doing this. Let me do it." Rachel looked at him and nodded. "Okay." They sat in silence for a few minutes. Then Rachel spoke. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why do you come here, really?" Julian thought. He took a deep breath. "Because it feels good to be here. With you two. I can't really explain it, but when I'm here, I don't feel empty." Rachel felt something tighten in her chest. "You feel empty." "Always," Julian admitted. "The house is too big, too quiet, and I forgot what it feels like not to be alone." Rachel reached out and touched his arm. "You don't have to feel that way." Julian looked at her. "I know. Now I know." Sophie started calling Julian Uncle Julian without any warning. It happened one afternoon when he arrived with more flowers. "Uncle Julian," she shouted from the window. Julian stopped in his tracks, surprised. Rachel appeared at the door looking a bit embarrassed. "Sorry, she just started calling you that." "I can ask her to stop if you—" "No," Julian interrupted, his voice a little choked up. "Don't. I like it." Rachel smiled. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." And he was, because it had been years since anyone had called him uncle or family or anything that meant belonging, and hearing it from Sophie was like a small part of him had healed. They were sitting in the living room one evening. Sophie was already asleep. Rachel had made tea. Julian held the warm mug in his hands. "It's good to be here," he said softly. Rachel looked at him. "It's good to have you here." They looked at each other for a few seconds, and they didn't need to say anything more because they both knew. They knew something was growing there, something good, something simple. It wasn't love yet. It wasn't passion. It was something quieter, deeper. It was friendship, trust, companionship. It was the feeling that, for the first time in a long time, neither of them was alone. Julian started showing up almost every day, sometimes in the morning, before work, sometimes in the afternoon, sometimes just for dinner. Rachel never complained. She just opened the door and let him in, and Sophie was always excited to see him. "Uncle Julian, did you bring a new book?" "Always." And he always did. Books, flowers, sometimes sweets for Sophie. Nothing extravagant, just little gestures that showed he cared. One day, Rachel said something that stuck with Julian. They were sitting in the kitchen. Sophie was drawing at the table. "You're not heavy," Rachel said suddenly. Julian looked at her. "What?" "You're not heavy," she repeated. "Having you here, it isn't a burden, it's light." Julian understood what she meant, because he felt the same way. Rachel didn't make demands, didn't ask too many questions, didn't expect anything. She just let him be, and that was something he'd never had before. "You're not heavy either," he said. Rachel smiled, and in that moment, they both understood. They understood they had found something rare. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't without its problems, but it was real. And it was enough. The weeks passed like that. Coffees, parks, quiet laughs, conversations about nothing. Julian felt good, better than he had felt in years, and Rachel felt like she could breathe, like she didn't have to carry everything on her own. Sophie had someone who cared about her, who brought her books, who listened to her stories. And Rachel had someone who saw her, not as a struggling single mother, not as someone needing help, but as someone worthy of being known. One afternoon, Julian was sitting on the couch. Sophie was curled up next to him, reading one of the books he had brought. Rachel was in the kitchen making tea. Julian looked around, the small living room, the old furniture, the unpainted walls, and he felt at home, more at home than in the mansion where he lived. Because home wasn't about size, it was about who was there. And there, in that small living room, with Sophie beside him and Rachel in the kitchen, Julian finally felt where he was supposed to be. "Uncle Julian," Sophie looked up. "Yes. Are you staying for dinner?" Julian looked at Rachel, who had returned with the tea. She smiled. "Are you?" Julian smiled back. "I am." And he stayed, because it was exactly where he wanted to be. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Rachel and Julian sat in the living room talking quietly. "Thank you," Rachel said suddenly. "For what?" "For being here. For caring. For not leaving." Julian took her hand. "I'm not going anywhere." And he wasn't, because for the first time in his life, Julian Parker had found something money couldn't buy. He had found a family, and he wasn't going to let that go. Saturday dawned with a clear sky and the kind of sun that doesn't burn, just warms. Julian showed up at the door at 10 in the morning. It was becoming a habit now. He knew that on Saturdays Rachel and Sophie stayed home, and he liked being with them. Sophie opened the door before he even knocked. "Uncle Julian, we're going to the park today." Julian smiled. "Are you?" Rachel appeared behind her daughter, tying her blonde hair into a ponytail. She woke up determined. She wants to see the ducks. "Can I come?" Julian asked. Sophie jumped up and down. "Of course you can." Rachel looked at him, smiling. "You always can." The park was a 15-minute walk. They went together, Sophie in the middle, holding both of their hands. She swung her arms, humming some song she had made up. "So does she always do that?" Julian asked Rachel quietly. "Always. She makes up songs for everything. Yesterday she made one about brushing her teeth." Julian laughed. "Really? Really?" It was 10 minutes long. It had a chorus and everything. There was something so light about it, so simple and good. The park was crowded. Families spread out on the lawns, children running around, ice cream vendors ringing their bells. When they reached the pond, Sophie ran off towards the ducks. "Slow down!" Rachel called out, but she was laughing. They followed her more slowly, walking side by side. "Do you come here often?" Julian asked. "When we can. Sophie loves it." "And it's free," Rachel said with a half smile. "We bring stale bread, and she's happy for the whole afternoon." Julian nodded. He understood what she didn't say, that most activities cost money she didn't have. They sat on a bench near the pond. Sophie was crouched at the water's edge, tossing breadcrumbs to the ducks. She laughed every time a duck got too close. "Be careful not to fall in," Rachel warned. "I know, Mommy." Julian smiled, watching the girl so focused. She seemed so happy with simple things. She is. I think kids have that gift, of finding joy where we don't even see it anymore. She gets that from you. Rachel looked at him. "Me? You find joy in simple things too. I saw you do it. Creating magic with nothing." Rachel was quiet for a moment, watching Sophie try to count how many ducks there were. "Thank you. Sometimes I don't know if I do enough for her." "You do more than enough. Look at her. Look how happy she is." They sat there watching Sophie play. The sun filtered through the trees, making shadows dance on the ground. There were other people around, young couples, large families, elderly people feeding pigeons. It was an ordinary afternoon, but at the same time, it was perfect. After a while, Sophie came running back and plopped down between them on the bench. "Uncle Julian, did you have ducks when you were a kid?" Julian laughed. "No, but I had a dog." Sophie's eyes widened. "That really? What was he like?" Julian thought, the memory returning after being stored away for years. "He was a mutt, small, brown, with one floppy ear. I called him Buddy." "Buddy," Sophie repeated, liking the name. "And did he do tricks?" "He did. He knew how to sit, lie down and shake. Down. But his best trick was stealing food from the table when no one was looking." Sophie laughed out loud. "He was sneaky." "He was. Once he stole an entire cake the maid had made. My mother was furious." Rachel smiled. "And what happened?" "She banned me from giving him food for a week, but I gave it to him in secret anyway." Sophie rested her head on his arm. "You really liked him?" "I did. He was my best friend for years. Every time I came home from school, he was there waiting at the door." "And your parents? Did they play with you?" Julian hesitated. "Not so much. They worked a lot, so it was mostly just me and Buddy." Sophie took his hand. "You must have been lonely." Julian squeezed her little hand. Touched. "Sometimes, but Buddy helped." Rachel looked at him, seeing something on his face she hadn't seen before, an old sadness, a loneliness he had learned to hide. "Do you still have a dog?" Sophie asked. "No. Buddy died when I was 18. And after that, I never got another one. The house was too empty." "You live alone?" "I do." Sophie wrinkled her nose. "That's sad." Julian smiled in peace, but the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sometimes. But I got used to it." Rachel felt the urge to say something, but Sophie had already stood up. "Can I go see the swings?" "You can, but stay where I can see you." "Okay." And she ran off again, her blonde hair flying behind her. Julian and Rachel sat there, side by side, in comfortable silence. The sounds of the park continued around them, children laughing, birds singing, the gentle lapping of the pond water against the shore. "You shouldn't have had to get used to it," Rachel said after a while. Julian looked at her. "To what?" "To the loneliness." "No one should have to get used to that." Julian was quiet for a moment. "But it's easier that way, that when you get used to it, it doesn't hurt as much." "It doesn't hurt. But it's not really living either." Julian looked at her, surprised by the depth of her words. "And you, did you get used to it?" Rachel thought. "For a while, yes. After Sophie's dad left, I thought it was better to be alone, safer. But then I realized I was just surviving, not living." "And what changed?" Rachel looked at Sophie on the swings. "She did. She taught me that you can't be afraid to let people in, even if it hurts later." Julian nodded, understanding. They sat there for a few more minutes, just observing. There was something comforting in the silence. They didn't need to fill every second with words. Sophie came back eventually, sweaty and tired. She threw herself into Rachel's lap. "Can I rest for a little bit?" "You can, sweetie." Sophie snuggled in, resting her head on her mother's shoulder. In a few minutes, her eyes began to close. Rachel adjusted her daughter on her lap, holding her carefully. She ran a hand through her blonde hair, whispering something low that Julian couldn't hear. He watched the scene, the way Rachel held Sophie, the way the little girl trusted completely, surrendering to sleep without fear, their blonde hair mingling, the peace on their faces. And he felt something tighten in his chest. "You're very good at that," he said softly. Rachel looked at him. "At what?" "At being a mom, at making her feel safe." Rachel smiled, a little sadly. "I try, but sometimes I'm afraid I'm not enough." "You are. Look at her. She sleeps peacefully because she knows you're here. That's everything." Rachel felt her eyes sting. "Do you really think so?" "I do." They sat there in silence for a while longer. Sophie sleeping, the ducks swimming, the gentle wind in the trees. Julian looked around. He saw other people in the park. He saw life happening, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel separate from it. He felt a part of it. "It's been a long time since I've felt like this," he confessed suddenly. Rachel looked at him. "Like what?" "Part of something. Like I belong somewhere." Rachel didn't say anything. She just reached out her free hand and touched his arm, and that was enough. They walked home slowly. Julian carried Sophie in his arms because she was still sleeping. The little girl was light. Her blonde hair fell over his shoulder. She sighed in her sleep and clutched his coat with her small hand. "She trusts you," Rachel said quietly as they walked. "I would never let her fall." "I know. That's why I let you." Julian understood the weight of those words. Rachel didn't trust easily. And she was entrusting him with what was most precious to her. When they got to the apartment, Julian carefully placed Sophie on the couch. Rachel covered her with a blanket. "Coffee?" she asked. "Always." They sat at the kitchen table. Rachel poured coffee into the blue mug that was now his. "Thanks for coming with us today," she said. "Thanks for letting me." "I really enjoyed it," Rachel smiled. "We did too. Sophie is always happy when you come. And you?" "Me too." Julian held the mug, feeling its warmth. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do I come over too much? I mean, if I'm bothering you, you can tell me. I don't want to invade your space." Rachel blinked, surprised. "You don't invade. And you don't bother. You're already a part of this place." Julian looked at her. "Am I?" "You are. Sophie waits for you every Saturday. I set your mug aside. You've become a routine, and I like that." Julian didn't know what to say. "I like it too, a lot." Rachel took a sip of coffee. Do you have plans for the rest of the day?" "No." "Want to stay for dinner? It's just pasta, but I'd love to." And he stayed. The weeks passed like that. Julian started showing up more frequently. Not every day, but almost. Sometimes he'd arrive in the morning with fresh bread, sometimes in the afternoon with simple flowers. On Saturdays, he always spent the whole day. He brought books for Sophie, always new books. And Sophie always ran to the door when he arrived. Rachel started to notice the little things, how she'd make coffee thinking he might show up, how she kept the house tidier on Saturdays, how she smiled when she heard his knock on the door. And she realized, without knowing exactly when it happened, that Julian had become part of her routine. He wasn't a visitor anymore. He was a constant. He was expected. And she liked that. One afternoon, Rachel was sewing in the living room. Julian was reading a book to Sophie. He stopped in the middle of the story and watched Rachel work. "You make that look easy." Rachel looked up. "What?" "Sewing. It seems so natural." Rachel smiled. "It's practice. I've been doing it since I was a teenager." "Where did you learn?" "On my own. My mother thought it was a waste of time, so she never taught me. But I needed to mend my clothes, so I learned." "She didn't like you sewing?" "No. She wanted me to be a lawyer or a doctor. Something important. Sewing was for poor people, she used to say." Julian nodded, understanding. "But you enjoy it." "I do. It calms me. And it's useful. I make all of Sophie's clothes this way." "You should sell them. You're good at what you do." Rachel paused, considering it. "Maybe one day." Sophie tugged on Julian's sleeve. "Keep reading." And he went back to the story, smiling. Julian started to notice everything. How Rachel always had coffee ready. How Sophie always had drawings saved to show him. How the flowers he brought were never thrown away, even when they wilted. How there was a spot for him on the couch. Little signs that he mattered, and that meant everything. Sophie started waiting for him every Saturday. She'd wake up early, get dressed, and stand by the window. "Is he coming yet, Mommy?" "Soon." And when Julian appeared, she would run. "Uncle Julian." Always the same ritual, always the same joy. Rachel would watch and feel something growing. Trust. She trusted him, truly, and that was rare. Julian grew attached too. He thought about them during the day, planned his visits, bought things with them in mind. His employees noticed, "You seem different." "How so?" "Lighter, happier." And he was. For the first time in years, he was genuinely happy. One night, after Sophie was asleep, they were talking in the living room. "You've changed things here," Rachel said. "I have." "Yes. Before, it was just me and her. And now, there's you. And it's good." Julian felt his throat tighten. You've changed my life too. I don't even remember what it was like before. Lonely, lonely, he repeated. Mush, but not anymore. Rachel smiled. Not anymore. The days continued. Julian showing up, Rachel opening the door, Sophie running to him, coffees, stories, simple dinners, and slowly he stopped being a visitor. He became a constant part, someone who was always there, and when he left, he always left something behind. A part of him stayed in that small house. With the two people who had become the center of his world, Rachel thought about this in the quiet nights, how everything had changed, how Julian had appeared and stayed. He didn't run away when things became routine. He stayed, and Sophie had grown attached. Rachel could see it in her daughter's eyes, in the way she waited, in her joy when he arrived. And Rachel had grown attached too, because Julian wasn't a burden. He didn't demand anything, he was just there, and that was rare, precious. Rachel caught herself thinking about him during the day, saving things to tell him, smiling at memories, and she realized she couldn't imagine her days without him anymore, without the coffees, without the conversations, without his presence filling the space, and that was scary. But it was also good, very good. Julian felt the same. He couldn't imagine Saturdays without going over there, couldn't go a day without thinking about them, about how Sophie laughed, about how Rachel smiled, about how complete he felt when he was there. For the first time in his life, Julian Parker had found a place where he belonged, not out of obligation, not out of necessity, but by choice, and that changed everything. One Saturday afternoon, the three of them were in the living room. Sophie was drawing on the floor, Rachel was sewing, Julian was reading. No one spoke. They just existed together. And Julian looked around. He saw the simple house, the old furniture, the unpainted walls, and he thought, this is it. This is where I want to be. Not in the empty mansion, not at elegant dinners, here, in this small living room, with these two people. And for the first time in a long time, Julian knew what it meant to be home. It wasn't about the place. It was about the people, and he had found his... It was an ordinary Wednesday when Rachel extended the invitation. Julian had shown up in the late afternoon, as he often did. Sophie was drawing at the kitchen table, and Rachel was making dinner. "Do you want to stay for dinner?" she asked, stirring a pot on the stove. Julian was sitting at the table, helping Sophie choose colors for her drawing. "Are you sure I don't want to be in the way?" Rachel glanced over her shoulder and smiled. "You're not in the way, and I made too much food anyway." "Then I accept." Sophie clapped her hands. "Yay, Uncle Julian is having dinner with us," Rachel laughed. "But it's nothing special, okay? Just rice, vegetables, and bread." "Perfect," Julian said, and it was true. He preferred this to any fancy dinner at an expensive restaurant. They ate at the small kitchen table. The plates were simple, some with chips on the edges. The glasses didn't match, but the food was hot and good. Sophie talked non-stop, telling them about her day at school, about her teacher, about a boy who had fallen at the park. Rachel and Julian listened, asking questions, laughing at her stories. There was something comforting in that, in the simplicity, in the normalcy. Julian looked around. The small kitchen, the old wallpaper, the yellowed light from the single bulb. And he felt more at home there than anywhere else. "Uncle Julian," Sophie called him. "Yes? Do you like living alone?" Rachel's eyes widened. "Sophie, you can't ask that." "Why not?" "Because it's personal." Julian shook his head, smiling. "It's okay, she can ask." He looked at Sophie. "No, I don't like living alone." "Then why do you?" Julian thought. "Because I didn't have anywhere else, or anyone else, until I met you two." Sophie smiled, satisfied with the answer. Rachel looked at him, something soft in her eyes. After dinner, Rachel sent Sophie to take a bath. The girl complained but obeyed. Julian helped with the dishes. They stood side by side at the small sink, one washing and the other drying. "Thanks for staying," Rachel said. "Thanks for inviting me. You know you don't need an invitation, right? You can show up whenever you want." Julian smiled. "I know, but thank you anyway." They finished the dishes in comfortable silence. Then they went to the living room. Rachel sat on the couch and Julian sat beside her. Not too close, but not far either. "Iced coffee," she offered. "Always." Rachel started to get up, but Julian gently held her arm. "Don't. Stay here, I'll make it." Rachel blinked, surprised. "You know how to make coffee." "I learned by watching you." And he went to the kitchen. He found the coffee grounds, the filter, the water. He did everything just as he had seen Rachel do dozens of times. When he came back with 2 mugs, Rachel was smiling. "You pay attention to everything, only to the things that matter." They drank their coffee in silence for a few minutes. They could hear Sophie singing in the shower. "Can I ask you something?" Rachel said suddenly. "Always. Did you ever have dreams? Like things you wanted to do when you were younger?" Julian thought. "I did, but they died out over time." "Like what?" "I wanted to travel, to see the world, not for business, but just to see it, to get to know places, people." "Why didn't you?" "I never had the time, or I never thought I did. There was always work, always something more important." Rachel nodded. "And now, do you still want to?" Julian looked at her. "Now I have other dreams." "What are they?" He hesitated, then decided to be honest. "To have a place where I belong, to have people waiting for me, to have something more than just work." Rachel smiled. "I think you've already achieved that." "I have." "You have. Sophie waits for you every Saturday." "I set your mug aside. You have a place here." Julian felt something tighten in his chest. "Thank you. You don't have to thank me. It's the truth." They talked for a while longer, about big things and small things. Rachel told him about when she was a child, about how she used to make up stories to entertain herself because she didn't have many toys. "My mother thought it was silly. She said I lived in a fantasy world. But you liked it." "I did, and I still do. That's why I tell Sophie stories every night." "She's lucky," Rachel smiled. "I'm the lucky one. She taught me how to see magic again." Julian understood that perfectly. "And you?" Rachel asked. "Are you afraid of anything?" Julian thought seriously. I'm afraid of being alone again, of waking up one day and realizing this was all temporary." Rachel looked at him. "That's not going to happen." "How do you know?" "Because I won't let it, and neither will Sophie." Julian smiled, but there was a vulnerability in his eyes. "And you? What are you afraid of?" Rachel was quiet for a moment. "Of not being enough. Of Sophie growing up and blaming me for everything I couldn't give her. She won't do that." "How do you know?" "Because she loves you. And love doesn't measure material things. It measures presence, and you have always been present." Rachel felt her eyes sting. "Thank you." "I needed to hear that." Sophie came out of the bathroom in her pajamas, her blonde hair still wet. "Can I stay up a little longer?" Rachel looked at the clock. "Just a little bit. It's already late." Sophie squeezed between them on the couch. She picked up a book from the small table. "Uncle Julian, can you read to me?" "Of course." He read the story while Sophie snuggled up. Rachel watched them, her heart full. When the story was over, Sophie's eyes were already closing. "Come on, sweetie, time for bed." Rachel took Sophie to her room. Julian stayed in the living room, listening to her soft voice singing quietly. When she came back, she sat on the couch again. She was out like a light. She was tired. She always is when you visit. She wants to enjoy every minute. Julian smiled. "Me too." They sat there talking late into the night, about dreams, fears, memories. Rachel told him about the time she tried to sell sweets to make extra money. It was a disaster. "I can't make sweets. Everything either burned or was raw." Julian laughed. "Really?" "Really. I lost money instead of making it. Sophie ate all the bad ones and said they were great, but I knew she was lying." They laughed together, a loose and genuine laugh. "Did you try other things?" "I did. I cleaned a few houses, did laundry, sewed for some neighbors. I did a little bit of everything." Julian nodded, admiring her resilience. It must have been hard. It was, but we survived, and things are better now. There was a comfortable pause. Rachel took another sip of her now cold coffee. You know, I had a good job once, she said suddenly, almost casually. Julian looked at her. Really? Where? I worked for a while in the laundry room of a hotel. I liked what I did, you know. The routine was good, the pay was decent, and the people were nice. Julian felt something shift in his chest, a premonition. What hotel? Rachel thought. The Grand Plaza, the big one downtown. Do you know it? Julian stopped breathing for a second. The Grand Plaza was his. One of his first hotels, one he was most proud of. I know it, he said, his voice a bit strange. Rachel didn't notice. I liked working there. It was tiring, but there was something good about making everything clean and tidy, knowing I was making a difference, even a small one. Julian couldn't speak, he just listened. But then Sophie got sick, Rachel continued, her voice calm, without resentment. It was a bad flu. She was about 3, and I had to miss a few days to take care of her. I didn't have anyone else to do it. She paused, taking another sip of coffee. When I came back, they said they had already replaced me, that I had been absent without notice. I tried to explain, but it was no use. They said they needed someone reliable. Julian felt his world crumble. He had been at the Grand Plaza around that time. He vaguely remembered a conversation with the manager about employee turnover. He remembered saying, I need people who show up every day. No exceptions. And now, sitting there, he realized that one of those people had been Rachel. Did you try to talk to anyone? A manager? He asked, his voice tighter than he intended. Rachel shrugged. I tried, but it didn't help. They said the decision was final. And after that? After that, I looked for other things. I didn't have time to be sad. I had to take care of Sophie. She spoke with a serenity that hurt. No anger, no resentment, as if it were just another thing that had happened. You should have been furious, Julian said. Rachel looked at him, surprised. Furious? Why? For them firing you, for not understanding, Rachel thought. At first, yes, I was. But then I realized it was pointless. Being angry wasn't going to change anything, so I let it go. Julian fell silent. He wanted to say something. He wanted to tell her that the hotel was his, that it had been his fault, his policies, his rigidity, but the words wouldn't come out. Do you think it was unfair? He asked instead. Rachel considered it. I do, but I understand their side too. They needed someone who was present, and I couldn't be. That's life. No, it wasn't just life. It was him. It was his fault. Julian felt a wave of guilt so strong he could barely breathe. Are you okay? Rachel asked, frowning. I'm fine. Just thinking. About what? About how strong you are. How you don't let these things break you. Rachel smiled, a little sheepishly. It's not strength, it's necessity. I had Sophie. I couldn't afford to fall apart. Julian nodded, but inside he was shattering. The conversation changed topics after that. Rachel talked about other things, about plans for the next month, about a book she wanted to buy for Sophie. But Julian barely heard her. His mind was elsewhere. At the Grand Plaza, in the laundry room, with the woman who had been fired for needing to care for her sick daughter, Rachel, the woman who was now sitting next to him, smiling, unaware that he had been responsible. Julian left shortly after midnight. Rachel walked him to the door. Thanks for staying, she said. Thanks for dinner. It was just rice and vegetables. It was perfect, Rachel smiled. Come back any time. I will. They looked at each other for a moment. There was something in the air, something unsaid, but neither of them knew what. Good night, Julian. Good night, Rachel. He turned and left. Rachel closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, smiling. It had been a good night. Simple, but good. Julian got into his car and sat there for several minutes, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his breathing heavy. The Grand Plaza. It was his. Her dismissal had been authorized by him. Not directly, perhaps, but it had been under his orders. Under his policies. Julian rested his head on the steering wheel. How had he not realized it before? How had he not asked where she used to work? And now? What did he do now? Tell her. Take responsibility. Or keep quiet. But staying quiet was lying. It was hiding. And he didn't want to do that to Rachel. Julian started the car and drove home. But the entire way, he could only think of one thing. He had unknowingly ruined her life, and now she trusted him, smiled at him, let him be a part of her life, without knowing who he really was. When he got home, Julian couldn't sleep. He stayed up all night, staring at the ceiling, thinking of Rachel in the laundry room, thinking of a sick Sophie. Thinking of the pain Rachel must have felt when she was fired, and thinking about how he had been responsible for it, even without knowing, even without wanting to. He had done it, and now he had to decide what to do. Rachel slept peacefully that night. It had been a good day, a simple dinner, a good conversation, real laughter. Julian was becoming a part of their lives in a way she hadn't expected, in a way she liked. She turned over in bed, hugging her pillow, and thought about how good it was to have someone like that, someone who listened, someone who cared, someone who stayed. Rachel smiled in the dark and slept, unaware that across town, Julian was wide awake, tormented, wondering how to tell the truth, or if he should tell it at all, because sometimes the truth hurts more than a lie, and Julian didn't want to hurt her, but he didn't want to lie either, and he was caught between those two things, not knowing which to choose. Morning came, a new day. But Julian knew nothing would be the same after that night, because now he knew. And knowing changed everything. The question was, what was he going to do with this knowledge? And the answer, he didn't know yet, but he had to figure it out. Soon, before it was too late, before the truth exploded in a way he couldn't control, before he lost the two people who had become the center of his world, Rachel and Sophie. And Julian realized, in that cold and lonely dawn, that he couldn't lose them. Not now, not after finally finding a place where he belonged. But he also knew he couldn't build anything on a lie, and he was trapped, completely trapped, between the truth that could destroy everything and the silence that was a lie, and he didn't know which to choose. Julian didn't say anything that night. He didn't tell Rachel that the Grand Plaza was his. He didn't mention that it was under his orders, his policies, that she had been fired. He just thanked her for dinner, said goodnight, and left. On the drive home, his hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The Grand Plaza. He remembered the hotel. Remembered the meetings about efficiency. Remembered telling the manager, "We can't have employees calling out. I need reliable people." And the manager had made decisions based on that, had fired people. One of them had been Rachel. Julian parked in the garage of his large and empty house. He sat there in the dark for a long time. Rachel trusted him. Sophie called him uncle. They had opened their lives to him, and he had been responsible for one of the worst things that had ever happened to them. How could he tell her that? How could he look Rachel in the eyes and say, "It was me. I was the one who cost you that job. I was the one who made you struggle." She would hate him. She would tell him to leave. She would realize he should never have entered their lives. Julian went inside, but he couldn't sleep. He lay awake all night, thinking, and when morning came, he had made a decision. He had to distance himself, at least for a while, until he figured out what to do, how to handle this, because being near Rachel while hiding this was lying, and he didn't want to lie to her. Saturday arrived. Sophie woke up early, as always. She combed her own hair, put on her favorite dress, and went to the window. "Is he coming yet, Mommy?" Rachel was in the kitchen making coffee. The blue mug was already set out on the table. He should be on his way. But the hours passed. 10 in the morning. 11, noon, Julian didn't show up. Sophie grew quieter and quieter. She went to her mother. "Did Uncle Julian forget about us?" Rachel felt a pang in her chest. "No, sweetie, he must be busy." "But he always comes on Saturdays." "I know, but sometimes people have other things to do." Sophie nodded, but her eyes were sad. Rachel took the blue mug and put it back in the cupboard. Sunday passed. Monday. Tuesday. Nothing. No knock on the door, no flowers, no book for Sophie. Rachel tried not to think about it. She tried to focus on work, on bills, on Sophie. But she missed him in everything. In the breakfast, she ate alone. In the empty living room in the afternoon, on the sofa where he used to sit, Sophie asked every day, "Is Uncle Julian coming today?" And every day Rachel made up a different excuse. He must be working a lot. He must be tired. He must be taking care of important things. But inside, Rachel knew the truth. He was gone. On Wednesday night, after putting Sophie to bed, Rachel sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea. She looked at the blue mug in the cupboard, the one that was Julian's, and she thought, of course, when they find out too much about you, they leave. It had happened before, with Sophie's father, with others. People stayed close until they found out how hard her life was, how she had no money, how complicated it was, and then they left. Julian had stayed longer than most. He had gotten to know Sophie. He had eaten dinner with them. He had become part of their routine, but in the end he had left too. Rachel took a sip of tea, feeling it go down, hot and bitter. She shouldn't have told him about the hotel, about being fired, about her struggles. She should have kept that to herself, because now he knew too much, and he had realized she wasn't someone worth staying for. Rachel closed her eyes, tired. She wasn't angry, just sad, because she had started to believe. She had started to think that Julian was different, that he would stay, but nobody ever stayed. They never did. Julian was suffering too. He spent his days in the office trying to work, but he couldn't concentrate. His secretary came into his office on Thursday. "You have a meeting in 10 minutes. Cancel it." "But it's important." "Cancel everything." She looked at him, worried. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." But he wasn't. He wasn't sleeping right, wasn't eating right. He could only think about Rachel and Sophie, about how Sophie must have been waiting for him on Saturday, about how Rachel must be wondering where he was. He picked up his phone several times, typed out messages and deleted them. He drove to their street twice, but he turned back before knocking on the door because he didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to explain without sounding like he was there out of guilt, out of pity, out of obligation, and he wasn't. He was there because he wanted to be, because they had become the most important people to him. But how could he prove that after disappearing for days? Sophie stopped asking after a week. She no longer asked, "Is Uncle Julian coming today?" She was just quieter, drew less, smiled less. Rachel noticed, and her heart ached, because Sophie had grown attached. She had started to see Julian as a constant, someone who stayed. And now he was gone, and Rachel didn't know how to explain to a 5-year-old that sometimes people just leave. For no reason, without warning, they just go. The following Saturday, Rachel didn't make extra coffee. She didn't set out the blue mug. She didn't tidy the house thinking he might show up because he wasn't going to show up. She knew that now. Sophie was playing quietly on the living room floor. "Want to go to the park?" Rachel asked, trying to cheer her daughter up. "No." "But you love the park." "It's not fun without Uncle Julian." Rachel felt her eyes sting, but she didn't let the tears fall. "Okay, then we'll stay here." She sat on the couch, picked up her sewing, but she couldn't concentrate. She kept looking at the door, waiting for a knock that wouldn't come, and she hated herself for still waiting. Julian woke up that Saturday with a decision. He couldn't run anymore. He had to talk to Rachel. He had to tell her the truth. And if she sent him away, at least he would have been honest. He showered, got dressed. He looked at the flowers he used to buy on the way. But he didn't buy any. He looked at the books he always brought for Sophie, but he didn't bring one, because this wasn't about gifts. It wasn't about nice gestures. It was about the truth. And he needed to go there with nothing but that. It was 3 in the afternoon when Julian knocked on the door. Rachel was in the kitchen. She heard the knock and her heart leapt. But she didn't run. She didn't get her hopes up, because she had grown used to disappointment. She walked to the door slowly and opened it. Julian was there. No flowers, no books, nothing in his hands, just him. His eyes were tired. His face was tense. "Hi," he said softly. "Hi." They stood there for a few seconds in silence. "Can I come in?" Julian asked. Rachel hesitated. Then she stepped back. "You can." Julian came in. He saw Sophie on the living room floor. The little girl looked up, and her eyes widened. "Uncle Julian!" She stood up and ran, but stopped before she reached him. As if she was afraid he would disappear again, Julian knelt down. "Hi, Sophie. You disappeared." "I know." "I'm sorry." "Why?" Julian didn't know what to say, so he just opened his arms, and Sophie ran into them. He hugged the little girl, feeling his chest tighten. Rachel watched from the kitchen doorway, her arms crossed. "Sophie, go to your room for a little bit. Julian and I need to talk." "But go on, sweetie." "You can play with him later." Sophie looked at Julian, who nodded. "I'm not leaving, I promise." Sophie went slowly to her room, looking back with every step. When the door closed, Rachel turned to Julian. "What happened?" Julian took a deep breath. "I need to tell you something." "Okay." They went to the living room, sat on the couch. "It's not too close in, but not far either." Julian looked at his own hands. "I didn't know how to tell you, and I was scared. That's why I disappeared." "Scared of what?" Julian looked at her. "Of what you would think, of how you would see me." Rachel frowned. "Julian, you're not making any sense." He took another deep breath. "Rachel, that hotel where you worked. The Grand Plaza. What about it?" "It was mine." Rachel blinked. "What?" "The hotel was mine. It is mine. I own that chain." Rachel stood quiet, processing. You own the Grand Plaza?" "I do. I have several hotels, but that was one of the first." Rachel stood up. She started pacing the room. So when I told you that about being fired, I realized it had happened at my hotel, under my orders, my policies." Rachel stopped pacing. Did you know I had worked there when you met me?" "No." Julian stood up quickly. "No, I swear. I didn't know. I only found out when you told me. And then I didn't know what to do." Rachel looked at him, trying to understand. "And you disappeared." "I disappeared because I didn't want you to think that I was here out of guilt, out of pity, or because I felt responsible. And you don't." Julian hesitated. "I do. Of course I do. But that's not why I'm here." "Then why?" Julian took a step towards her. "Because I want to be. Because you and Sophie have become the most important people to me. Because when I'm here, I feel at home. And that has nothing to do with the hotel, with the past, with guilt." Rachel was quiet. "How do I know that's true?" "You don't. There's no way to prove it. But I'm asking you to believe me." Rachel looked at him for a long time. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the sincerity on his face, and she realized he wasn't lying. He had really stayed away because he was afraid, not out of disinterest, not out of contempt, out of fear of being misunderstood. Rachel took a deep breath. "You hurt me, disappearing like that." "I know. I'm sorry." "Sophie waited for you." "Every day. I know, and I'm sorry. It wasn't my intention." Rachel crossed her arms. "And what do you want now?" "I want to stay, if you'll let me. I want to keep coming here. I want to keep being a part of your lives." "Why?" "Because it's where I want to be. It's as simple as that." Rachel looked at him. Then she looked at the bedroom door where Sophie was. And she made a decision. "You're already here," she said softly. Julian blinked. What?" "You're already here. You're already a part of this. You've already become someone important to us, and that's what matters." "Rachel, what happened at the hotel? It was bad, it was unfair, but it wasn't your fault. Not directly. And I'm not going to blame you for it." Julian felt his eyes sting. "Are you sure?" Rachel nodded. "I am, because I know you now. I know who you are, and I know you wouldn't do that on purpose." Julian didn't know what to say. "Thank you." "But don't disappear again," Rachel said, her voice firm. "If you have a problem, Tell me. We'll solve it together. Don't run away. Okay, I promise. Rachel gave a half smile. And the next time you disappear, I'm coming to your house to get you. Julian laughed, a slightly wet laugh. Okay. They stood there for a few more seconds. Then Rachel stepped forward and hugged him. Julian hugged her back, holding her tight. I'm sorry, he whispered. It's okay. When they separated, Rachel opened the bedroom door. Sophie, you can come out. Sophie ran out and jumped into Julian's arms. Did you really come back? I really came back. Promise you won't disappear again. I promise. Sophie looked at her mother. Is it true, Mommy? Is he going to stay? Rachel looked at Julian, who looked back at her. He is, she said. He's going to stay. And she believed it, because Julian had come back, not with flowers or gifts, but with the truth. And sometimes, the truth was the best gift anyone could give. They spent the rest of the afternoon together. Sophie didn't leave Julian's side. She showed him all the drawings she had made that week. Told him everything that had happened. Julian listened attentively to everything, smiling. Rachel made coffee, poured it into the blue mug. I missed using this. Julian smiled. Me too. When Sophie went to play, Rachel sat beside him. So you really own all those hotels? Julian nodded. I do. So you're rich? I am. Rachel was quiet for a moment. And does that change anything? Julian looked at her. For you? For you? Julian shook his head. No, it doesn't change anything. You're still you. Sophie is still Sophie, and I still want to be here. Rachel smiled. Okay then. And it was okay, because in the end what mattered wasn't his money, or their past, or what had happened at the hotel. What mattered was the present, and in the present Julian was there, choosing to stay, choosing them. And Rachel finally realized that he wasn't going to leave, because if he wanted to, he would have already. But he had come back, not with empty excuses or expensive gifts, but with sincerity, with truth, and with the promise to stay, and that was more than enough. When Julian left that night, Sophie hugged him tight. Come back tomorrow? I'll be back. Promise? I promise. Rachel walked him to the door. Thank you, he said. For what? For letting me come back, for giving me another chance. Rachel smiled. You didn't need another chance. You always had a place here. Julian smiled back. And when he left, he felt lighter than he had in days, because he had told the truth, and Rachel hadn't left. She had stayed, and she had told him he could too, and that changed everything. Rachel closed the door and leaned against it. She heard Sophie singing in her room, heard the clock on the wall, heard life going on. And she smiled, because Julian had come back. And this time, she believed it was for real, that he wouldn't disappear again because he had had the courage to be honest, to show who he was, including the difficult parts, and she had accepted him. Because in the end, everyone has a past. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what a person does afterward, and Julian had come back. He had apologized. He had been sincere, and that was worth more than anything. Rachel went to the kitchen. She took the blue mug, Julian's mug, and left it on the table for tomorrow, for when he came back, as he had promised, and she believed he would, because now she knew. She knew he wasn't there out of guilt or pity or obligation. He was there because he wanted to be. And that made all the difference. The night was calm. Sophie had fallen asleep on the living room couch after a full day of playing with Julian. He had spent the whole day there, as promised, and as he had been doing since he came back. 3 weeks had passed since that conversation, since he had told her the truth about the hotel, and Rachel had said it didn't matter. And in those 3 weeks, something had changed between them. It wasn't just friendship anymore. It wasn't just companionship. It was something deeper, more true. Rachel covered Sophie with a blanket, adjusting her daughter's blonde hair. The little girl slept peacefully, hugging her doll Bella. When Rachel returned, Julian was on the small balcony, standing looking out at the quiet street. "Are you leaving?" she asked softly. He turned. "I don't know. I wanted to stay a little longer, if you don't mind." "I never mind." Rachel went out onto the balcony too. The air was cool. There were few stars visible because of the city lights, but the night had something special about it. "Sit with me," Julian asked. There were 2 old chairs on the balcony. They sat side by side. The silence was comfortable, as it always was between them. After a few minutes, Julian reached for her hand. Rachel looked. Then she placed her hand in his. Julian's fingers closed around hers, holding it gently, as if she were something precious. Rachel felt her heart race. "Rachel," Julian said softly. "Yes?" He took a deep breath. He looked at her hand in his. Then he looked into her eyes. "I need to tell you something, and I don't know how to keep it in anymore." Rachel felt something tighten in her chest. "Okay." Julian squeezed her hand a little tighter. "I've fallen in love with both of you." Rachel stopped breathing. Julian continued, his voice steady but soft. "With you, with Sophie, with this life you've built, with this place that has become more of a home to me than any other." Rachel felt her eyes well up. "I don't want to change your life," he went on. "I don't want to come in here and mess everything up. But I want to be a part of it, for real, not as a visitor. Not as a friend who stops by every now and then." He paused, taking another deep breath. "If you'll let me, I want to take care of you from now on. I want to be here every day. I want to be someone Sophie can trust, someone you can trust. I want to be a family with you." Rachel felt the tears fall. "Julian, I know it's a lot. And if you don't want to, I understand. But I had to say it. I needed you to know." Rachel looked at him, at his honest face, his sincere eyes, the hand holding hers so carefully. And she realized something. She had fallen in love too, without realizing when, without planning it. But she had fallen in love with the way he read stories to Sophie, with the way he helped in the kitchen, with the way he looked at her as if she were enough, as if she were special. "I've fallen in love with you too," she said, her voice trembling. Julian's eyes widened. "Really?" Rachel nodded, smiling through her tears. "Really. For a while now, I was just afraid to admit it, because people always leave. But you came back. Even though you were scared, you came back, and that changed everything." Julian cupped her face with both hands. "I'm not leaving, not ever again, I promise." "I know," Rachel whispered. "I believe you." They stayed there, faces close, breaths mingling. And then Julian kissed her. It was gentle, careful, full of promises. When they parted, Rachel rested her head on his shoulder. Julian wrapped his arm around her, holding her tight. "So are we going to do this?" Rachel asked softly. "Are we going to be a real family?" "If you want to." "I want to. Sophie will want to, too. She already loves you. I love her too, and I love you." Rachel smiled, closing her eyes. "I love you too." They sat there, holding each other, looking at the night sky, and for the first time in years, Rachel allowed herself to feel safe, safe in the knowledge that she had someone by her side, that she wasn't alone, that she had found someone who would stay, not out of obligation, not out of pity, but out of love, real love. "We need to tell Sophie," Rachel said after a while. "Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow?" Julian kissed the top of her head. "She'll be happy." "She will. She's always wanted you to stay." "I've always wanted to too." Rachel smiled. "So that's it. We're a family now." "That's it," Julian agreed, holding her closer. And there, on that small balcony in a simple house, they started something new. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't traditional, but it was theirs. A family built not by blood, but by choice, by love, by companionship, by belonging. And that was more than enough. It was everything. If this story touched your heart,